Great. So,
Mm.
welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a fun intermission listening to Pete and Mike talk.
Uh,
Now we have Michael Bavidge's talk, titled "Can You Help?" An excellent title, I think. To introduce Michael Bavidge, he was a lecturer of philosophy at Newcastle University. He worked at the Centre for Lifelong Learning and then on the Philosophical Studies program at the university. He has written on psychopathy and the law, pain and suffering, and animal minds. Last year, Big Books, a locally based venture, published a collection of his essays, Philosophy in the Borders. He is the president of the Philosophy Society of England, which brings together academic and non-academic philosophers who believe in the importance of exploring philosophical ideas and their relevance to our social and personal lives. So there you go. Mike Bavidge, feel free to take over, and afterwards we'll have the usual Q&A session.
okay. Am I going to come up on the main screen? Can you see? Advise me, Joshua. Can you see me?
I can see you just fine.
And am I filling the whole screen?
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right. And you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I've written a paper, so I'm just going to read it, and I have no snazzy slides, so I apologize for that. I hope it's not too much of a burden. Okay. I called it "Can You," in scare quotes, help? As befits a philosopher, I'm thinking about large problems. What's the nature of mind? How does mind fit in the physical world? How can we and some other animals live meaningful lives? These problems are not only large, it's unclear what sorts of problems they are. Today, I want to focus on a question which is less cosmic, but gets its importance from its place in the landscape of issues about mind and its place in nature, and which might help to get clearer about the nature of the problems themselves. I'll begin by sketching out the route I followed to get to my question, can you help? About 20 years ago, I was asked to write about the philosophical thoughts of the New Zealand physicist John Zeeman. One of his papers sets out to promote the understanding of science as a social enterprise. His main enemy is what he calls methodological solipsism, according to which the world of things and beings is surveyed and interpreted from the point of view of a single individual. And scientists think of themselves as lone explorers relying only on the evidence of their own eyes and their rational inferences concerning the hidden mechanisms by which these personal percepts may be generated. He is not just recommending that we pool our resources. His project concerns how we have resources to pool in the first place. To pursue this idea, he cannot avoid, though he tries, what he calls the doubtful trade, a philosophical investigation of the real nature of the irreducible natural phenomenon of intersubjectivity. Irreducible, natural intersubjectivity. Zeeman's line of thought highlights with a new sharpness a deficiency in the way mind has, for the most part, been discussed in philosophy. First and third person accounts have the right to contribute to the metaphysical picture of the human being. From the first person viewpoint, we experience ourselves as self-conscious, rational, and responsible. From the third person perspective, we know ourselves to be part of the natural world and explicable in terms of it. The third person is the respective voice of science. The first person is the spontaneous voice of personal experience. As metaphysicians, we then worry about how the two accounts can be reconciled. Only the second person seems permanently excluded. Why is that? Why is it not allowed to contribute to our picture of ourselves and our minds? It seems bizarre that, The constant interpersonal communication that makes up the fabric of human life plays little or no part in the formulation of philosophical theories about ourselves and others. The second person is the voice of conversation. It is expressed in the vocative case. That very fact helps to enforce the exclusion. The vocative is not the voice of reporting or theorizing. It may have personal interest as the expression of subjective experience, but it seems irrelevant to, perhaps even an obstacle to, the fact-finding inquiries of science or introspection. The priority it is given to the first and third persons and the relegation of the second person are reinforced by the central role that consciousness plays in the philosophy of mind. Consciousness is thought of in the first person as available to immediate introspection, or in the third person as a deeply mysterious phenomenon which one day might be explained by neurology or phenomenology or some cyborg of the two. It is, we are told, the really hard problem, which at present defies resolution. The result of this fixation on consciousness is that the widespread features of personal life, actions, interactions, thoughts, intentions, and emotions are boiled down to a single, tiny, but infinitely dense phenomenon, consciousness. Consciousness seems to be the core of the mind problem because it pretends to be, but is not, the name of a natural kind. Perceiving, thinking, intending, feeling are thought of as species of conscious state. Although consciousness is not even a necessary condition, let alone the essential nature of these activities, the idea that consciousness is the really hard problem, as many contemporary philosophers have come to call it, is the distillation of that mistake. If we identify being minded with being conscious, we focus on an aspect of our experience that seems to have a close similarity with perception. Then we generalize it into the essence of mind. On this account, being minded is to be conscious of or to be aware of some data. And this awareness is identified with perception as in empiricism, or at least modeled on perception as in rational intuition. We understand something with the mind's eye. In either case, a subject confronts an object. If we buy into this picture, the task facing any inquiry, scientific or philosophic, is how to describe and theoretically explain consciousness and what appears to it. Consciousness concentrates mindedness into the binary lock of subject and object, and as a result, it drives us to explain meaning in terms of an internal awareness of our own thoughts. More specifically, intentionality and normativity are thought of as the special qualities of mental or neurological states. That is, individual inner states are taken to have the qualities of being about something and of being capable of being correct or incorrect. If this is where we find ourselves, and yet we are struck, along with Simon, by the irreducible natural phenomenon of intersubjectivity, what are we to do? And where are we to start? Here's a modest proposal. Let's think about what is involved in a person being present to others in a social environment. There are many meanings for the word present and a variety of forms. Etymologically, it comes from the present participle of praese, to be before someone or something, to be in front of. It can be an intransitive verb. To be present can mean simply being there or being here. The Prime Minister was present in the House of Commons on Monday. School children respond present when the register is called. But even in this minimal sense, being present does not mean just being located in. We are all, right now, present in this Zoom session, but we are scattered all over the place. It can be a transitive verb. I can present someone to someone else. I introduce them. I even can present myself. I make myself available. I present myself as a this or a that, a candidate, a suitor, or a plumber. Consequently, it has a passive voice. One can be presented at court or presented as a representative of the Allotment Association. A play is presented at the Palladium. This is connected to the noun a present in the sense of a gift, something offered. It can become an abstract noun on formal or important occasions. Someone, a waiter or a bodyguard, can be in the same room as the Queen, but not be in her presence. When he met Mandela, he felt he was in the presence of greatness. A curious linguistic point that has philosophical implications is that the word present is preposition rich. That is, there are a number of prepositions that go with it in various idioms. One can be present at, present in, present with, present as. You could be presented to or presented by or be in the presence of. In contrast, conscious is preposition por. It seems joined at the hip to of. This reflects the point that consciousness is welded to its object, or putting it the other way around, the only things of which we are conscious are objects to which consciousness is welded. Sense data, qualia, or this, said, gesturing at the room I am now sitting in, as opposed to the room in which I am presently present and where I am presenting this paper. Consciousness used in this way, the way philosophers tend to use it, is non-perspectival. This is a strange feature of consciousness. It is modeled on sight, but it's not seeing from here or from there. The preposition richness of presence captures the complexity of our relatedness to other people and of our engagement with the world around us. This is my line of thought up to now. First, we might make some progress in the philosophy of mind if we allow the second person into the philosophical conversation. Secondly, the introduction of the second person will encourage us to think in terms of our presence in the world rather than in terms of consciousness. Thirdly, we will not then be forced to identify intentionality and normativity as inner qualities and mental states or as arising out of acts I carry out on myself. Fourthly, the ability to say meaningful things about the world around us is spread across the complex of interactivities that characterize personal presence. And finally, we can't give substance to the notion of personal presence without putting you center stage. So finally, I've arrived at you and the hope that you might help. But you won't help if talking about you is just a chatty way of referring to us. That is, to the first person plural. Nor if it's a manufactured way of referring to other people in the abstract, the other with a capital O. And finally, you won't help if in talking about you, a transactional attitude is taken to intersubjectivity. I'll say a few things about each of these points. It's not obvious how introducing many individuals into the picture explains meaning, if having only one individual does not. If the meaningfulness of what I do or how I communicate cannot be explained in terms of my own resources, how does adding another equally inadequate individual help? Why do things look more promising if we introduce a number of mindless creatures rather than just one? Simon Blackburn raises this question in his book, Spreading the Word. He writes, if the practice of an individual in isolation is not enough to create the fact that his words have meaning, how is the practice of a lot of us together to create the fact that our words have meaning? He presses the point home, if an individual cannot create and abide by his own use of a term, the fact that he is surrounded by others seems a doubtful source of help. I'm not suggesting that talking in terms of we rather than I is always wrong or useless. It may help in relation to some problems. For example, in moral philosophy, it is useful to think of moral reasons not as my reasons, but as common property, as the reasons we have together in terms of which we explain our behavior to each other. Jane Hughes suggests we should think in terms of those who together with me constitute an us, for whom various things are valuable, among whom it can be discussed what those things are and by whom it is to be decided what is to be done about them. To think this way would be to call on the idea of collective intentionality, of joint thought and joint action, which has recently become the focus of much attention. However, merely pluralizing the I think to we think in itself just adds to the number of monologues. In a similar way, Davidsonian triangulation introduces a plurality of persons in its account of intentionality without actually explaining how the plurality generates meaning. It explains intentionality in terms of trig points, person A, person B, and an object in the world. It gives us a kind of overview, as it were a diagram of a meaningful environment. It presents a God's eye view beloved by philosophers, but the attraction is dangerous because it gives an illusion of an explanation. It is an abstract, third-person representation of the problem, not a solution to it. In a different philosophical tradition, Sartre's Peeping Tom has a similar difficulty. He writes in the well-known passage, "Let's imagine that moved by jealousy, curiosity, or vice, I've just glued my ear to the door and looked through the keyhole." He actually, well, the English translation does have him gluing his ear and his eye to the keyhole. Anyway, as a peeping Tom, I objectify whoever is in the room. I have no presence in the room. I'm a pure consciousness of things. Then I hear footsteps in the hall. I instantly become the looked at. The other is there, and I am objectified in the shameful role of a peeping Tom. Though Sartre makes his point in novelistic terms, it is as abstract as triangulation. The peeping Tom's metaphysical status is transformed not by the arrival of, for example, his mother, who would disapprove, or by his boozy rugby team mate who would push him out of the way so he can have a look too, but by the abstract other. Would the same lesson be drawn if he suddenly noticed a CTV camera, surveillance camera on the wall? It's true that Sartre goes on to consider more concrete relations with others, but the key move has been made. He asks a very abstract question and gives an abstract answer in terms of alienation and hell as other people. He presents his abstract answer as the discovery of the essence of human relationships in comparison to which actual encounters are, at best, epiphenomenal, at worst, examples of bad faith. Again, I don't deny that Sartre's analysis may have its uses. My only point is that if you appeal to you to explain the emergence of meaning, and if we think of you as the other, we will be no further on. A plurality of monologues, even if they happily coincide, does not help. That was Blackburn's point. Likewise, a plurality of monologues which are locked into a denial of each other's metaphysical status is equally useless. Meaning cannot emerge from coincidence, it requires a common life, nor can it proceed from pre-established dissidence. It can't proceed from pre-established dissidence, the rejection of the endorsement of others. Talking about we, the first person plural, or about the other, a third person construct, may turn out to be ways of keeping you at arm's length. We need you because only the sheer interactivity of people will do. The opinions we have about each other, the theories we may construct, the inferences we may draw, all arrive too late. For opinions, theories, and inferences to be possible, we must already be communicating, already understanding other people, and making ourselves understood by them. Many theorists find this so difficult to accept that they are prepared to credit babies, vervet monkeys, and prairie dogs with an innate theory of mind, rather than say that they can communicate without pre-existing opinions, theories, and inferences. To avoid this impasse, we have to accept that practices create their own participants. Infants join the conversation before they have anything to say. Children join the game before they acquire the skills of a pet player. The thoughts and feelings of which individuals are capable are shaped by the repertoire of behavior available to them. As Kathleen Raine has it, the song is older than the singer. The song is older than the sorrow. William Webb Ellis is credited with inventing rugby when he picked up the football and ran with it. But that act in itself was nothing more than a foul, and Ellis was a very naughty boy. It was only when an unnamed hero tackled him and the other boys thought this looks like fun that the inaugural moves of a new game were made. Neither he nor his friends needed an innate theory of rugby. Some philosophers have made a more refined comparison to explain the same point, interestingly on both sides of the argument. Simon Blackburn compares the social theory of the emergence of meaning to the idea of an orchestra without a conductor. In a real orchestra, the players are already competent before they turn up for rehearsals. The conductor arrives as an authoritative figure, bearing a score, which is a set of rules for producing a particular sound. If we take all that away, Blackburn thinks we are left only with mutual pressures towards conformity, enforced by a nasty habit that the members of the orchestra, we can hardly call them musicians, have of turning on players whose notes are discordant. His argument is that this analogy goes no way towards explaining how meaning and correctness and incorrectness could take shape out of this chaotic exercise of competing forces. On the other side of the argument, Martha Nussbaum, Cora Diamond, and Gary Hapberg look not to classical music, but to jazz improvisation. The jazz player must, like an improvising musician, in contrast with one who works from a score, be actively responsive and responsible, a person who will not let the others down. Hapberg writes that jazz improvisation is the seeing and enacting of a possibility that others did not even imagine was there, taking up a theme and making something entirely unexpected out of it. This is improvisation with insight, with originality, with inventiveness. Whether you want to think of Johnny Wilkinson, John Coltrane, or John Barbaroli, what we are trying to make less mysterious is the emergence of meaning. Wittgenstein wrote, "Under what circumstances pointing can explain, that is, convey the use of a word. Not to a baby, it learns by being drilled. There is therefore no occult act of naming an object that in itself can give a word a meaning." This remark, which is from Notes for the Philosophical Lecture, written probably in 1934, as you will know, was worked over at length and with subtlety in the private language argument and the philosophical investigations. I quote it for two reasons. His claim was that there's no occult act of naming. His claim that there is no occult act of naming amounts to the idea that the institution of naming involves what I call sheer interactivity. It could not be the mental act of a solitary individual. Wittgenstein's on my side. The second reason is that he's wrong, hopelessly wrong, it seems to me, in saying that babies are drilled in naming. Soldiers are drilled. They are given a sequence of closely choreographed movements, and they are made to repeat them endlessly. They are barked at if they deviate in the slightest. Their eyes are fixed straight ahead. They end up in the guardhouse. if they decide, in Monty Python style, to add their own flourishes. Infants, in contrast, cannot catch on to the institution of naming through correction enforced by a nasty parental habit of turning on infants whose first words are not quite up to scratch. Correction requires that a standard has already been established. Babies are invited to participate in language, to join the game to see where it leads. Even when it's tempting to say they are following a rule, they obey the rule blindly. Not blindly in the military sense that guardsmen's eyes are fixed straight ahead and see nothing, but blindly in the sense that the baby could not formulate the rule and has no idea where all this is leading, any more than Ellis and his school friends had any idea where their indiscipline would lead. Meaning cannot arise from some sort of deal, not an agreement, not a quid pro quo. A social theory of meaning requires real transactions between you and me, but that should not be understood transactionally. I'm using transactional in the pejorative sense. Transactional relationships are economic and functional. They're based on an exchange of goods or services. The private language argument may be taken to say that meaning cannot be established by forming a contract with myself to use a word to mean such and such. Wittgenstein, when he discusses language about pain, describes the view he rejects. A definition surely serves to establish the meaning of a sign. Well, that is done precisely by the concentrating of my attention. For in this way I impress on myself the connection between the sign and the sensation. His immediate argument against that view goes like this: but I impress it on myself can only mean this process brings it about that I remember the connection right in the future. But in the present case, I have no criterion for correctness. One would like to say whatever is going to seem right to me is right. And that only means that here we cannot talk about right. Someone might conclude from these remarks that I need to go to another person, to you, and to agree with you to use a word in a certain way. And then the privacy problem is solved, because what seems to me to be right can be checked against what seems to you to be right. That is the opposite of what Wittgenstein means. When he says that a rule I give myself in a private language won't do, he doesn't mean that I should rush off and get you to go through essentially the same performance so that we can compare notes. The lesson he actually draws is, when one says he gave a name to his sensation, one forgets that a great deal of stage setting in the language is presupposed if the mere act of naming is to make sense. What I need is not a second opinion, but the stage setting, the established practices within which the formation of opinions, yours or mine, becomes possible. The transactional model assumes that both parties have a good idea of what they are offering and what they hope to get out of the deal. Established language users can ask each other about the meaning of words. For example, I could come along with a word which I don't know the meaning of, for example, transactional, and ask you for a definition. But think again about the acquisition of a first language. An infant cannot enter the language by having the meaning of words explained to her. We could only think that way if we imagine that the infant already has a language at her disposal. A second problem with the transactional model is that when the exchange has been completed, the relationship ends. Any effects it may have outside of the exchange are thought of as collateral. Trump is accused of operating a transactional model of politics. He thinks of political activity as the art of the deal. During the 2016 Republican primary, he said, "I give to everybody. When they call, I give. And you know what? When I need something from them 2 years later, 3 years later, I call them, they're there for me. He has no thought, the accusation goes, for the corrupting effect that his deals may have on the business or political life of his society. The interactions that generate meaning involve more than the coming together of two individuals. They create a social space made up of obligations, permissions, and opportunities. It is this space that gives meaning to our actions as opposed to functionality. It is a space for which we have responsibility. That is, our activities in that space have meaning for us. As a consequence, an adequate description of our behavior could only be given in terms of thoughts, feelings, and intentions, even if, because we are children or senile or vervet monkeys, we ourselves cannot produce such descriptions. When Els picked up the ball and when his friends tackled him, it did not end there. If it had, we would have called it a fight. The other boys could join in because there was, even in those first nanoseconds of the creation of rugby, something to join. Though, of course, there was no book of rules and only the most general sports field expectations. A new space had been opened up. The social space is a force field created by the tensions between first, second, and third persons in which we voice our everyday engagement with the world, express our relationships with each other, manipulate and manage affairs, amuse, seduce, and bully each other. We cooperate and compete, threaten and warn. We make our presence felt. We confront each other. We can keep company. All of these initiatives are interventions and intrusions. They elicit reinforcement or rejection, which are themselves equally energetic. We are cajoled, stimulated, encouraged, entertained, rehearsed, accepted, or of course the opposite. We are ignored, dismissed, or abused. If, as Blackburn suggests, we are surrounded by others, in the sense that we may be surrounded by a fence or trees or even onlookers, he would have a point. But we are not surrounded. We are co-present in a shared world, and this shared world is real. There is something there which we can come to know more about, something into which we can gain insight. One aspect of this thought that has exercised philosophers is the possibility of moral knowledge. Are we cognitivists or non-cognitivists or anti-non-cognitivists in our moral theories? The shared world provides something we can be right or wrong about. When Mr. Knightley says to Emma that her treatment of Miss Bates at the Box Hill picnic was badly done, poor Emma comes to see, through her own excuses, the real nature of how she had behaved. The social field of initiatives and reactions constitute and continually reconstitute what Kukla and Lance call pragmatic topography and normative space. An important implication of this metaphor is that you can be inside or outside the space. To be in it is to be caught up in the energetic exchanges that constitute the space. It is to be in the grip of the expectations, norms, and rules, if there are any, that characterize this interpersonal domain. Meaning emerges within normative space. We may say that it is in these spaces between people that the magic happens, but there is nothing magical about it. Take a formalized game like chess, for example. I see the board. If I'm not playing, even more if I can't play, the board is just there, an object in the world. But once I start playing, I am in the grip of the rules. This does not mean that I have to obey rules that are imposed upon me by some outside force. The rules are constitutive rules. They make the game be the game it is. And my engagement with those rules changes me personally. This part of my experience begins to show new possibilities and impossibilities, threats and opportunities. It even changes my perceptions. The board takes on a new appearance. The pieces bear down on diagonals, they block squares. Formalized games have books of rules, and we can be taught what they are, and what is required of us can be explained. In the unformulated activities that are fundamental to human life, there's no rule book, and we cannot be taught how to play. In infancy, we acquire language, the ability to communicate and to understand other people through participation. We are not taught or trained, let alone drilled. We are brought up to take some things seriously, to care about things. Upbringing does two things. It lays out a field of possibilities for the child, and it transforms the experience of the child. Think about the acquisition of a first language. Infants do not have to memorize a long vocabulary. The average 4-year-old is a master of its language, even though its vocabulary is limited. We do not teach it the intricacies of the subjective mood. We bring it up to live in the subjunctive, that is, in a space of coulds and shoulds and mays and mights. Infants hang about on the edges of language. They don't seem to be in a hurry. They linger on the threshold of language. They play on the edge of the enlanguaged world. They are carefree as they crash around in their first language, as Cavell puts it, with what charming curiosity, expectation, excitement, repetitions, the child says its first few words. As infants, we don't wander into the social space. We are called in. You are there at the beginning. Once called in, we do not just wander around as strangers in a foreign land. We need you to bed us down, to sustain us in our gradually acquired roles. We take on a second nature, which reaches right through our lives socially and as individuals. As we move away from infancy, we do not achieve an isolated autonomy. The dynamic exchanges we have with each other maintain us as individuals in the social world. Philosophical reflection on these direct interactions requires more than semantics and logic. We have to engage with the pragmatics of interactive behavior. For example, instead of analyzing the structure of statements that describe simple facts, we should ask what is involved in drawing attention to features of the environment. Drawing somebody's attention to something is more fundamental than asserting something to be the case. That is, we need real people and animals acting and responding in a real environment to talk sensibly about minds. The dynamics of conversation are not philosophically irrelevant. We bide our time, we keep our counsel, we make ourselves available. Seeing other people as persons with inner lives involves waiting on each other. As we listen, we give people time and space to speak. Conversation depends on the restraint involved in taking turns and in listening. In tense situations, we withhold speech or are shocked, speechless. Understanding each other and acquiring new ways of thinking and feeling emerge in what Steve Mulhall calls the turbulent heterogeneity of conversation. And more than that, if we need the real involvement of real people, we cannot think of them only as rational agents or as producers of speech acts. They will bring with them the baggage of, for example, age, sexuality, and social status. Philosophy, at least philosophy as practiced in the analytic tradition, will become much messier. If consciousness is our starting point, naturalizing the mind becomes impossible. As Jonathan Trigg and Michael Bavidge write, to seek to remove all reference to persons and animals from the things we say in cognitive science about thought, perception, and the rest is to cut ourselves off from the level-headed naturalism we all crave and land ourselves with a naturalizable conception of the mind or mind-brain as a kind of inner theatre for one, featuring thoughts and perceptions and the rest. So, this has been the direction of my thought. A spread of philosophical considerations from the epistemic car crashes of Cartesianism, through Wittgenstein's private language argument, to Simon's sociology of scientific methodology, leads to the conclusion that meaning cannot be explained in terms of individual conscious activities. We need a socially based theory of mind. We cannot get that without engaging directly with the interactions between people, between you and me, and with the normative spaces in between. This is a demanding business. I can't do it by myself, and it can't be done by some impersonal rule. That's why I need you. Can you help? Yes, but only if you get stuck in. That's my paper.
Thank you very much. I thought that was fantastic. And just a reminder about the Q&A. Yeah, if you are a participant in the call, you can ask questions to the Q&A. People on the panel, I'm aware that there's now like quite a few people on the panel. I don't think you can use the Q&A, so feel free to just message me directly if you have any questions for Michael Bavidge. I had a question I'd like to ask, kind of as a starter, more of a question of clarification. It seems that you are proposing kind of an epistemology that incorporates the you, like method as a method. And I'm wondering, and one thing I thought was really exciting in your paper was the distinguishing from the other and you, like posing the other as a third person treatment of other people rather than the you. And I was wondering, is this to do with where knowledge is functioning in how we think of other people? So for example, is viewing another person, I think about Lacan, like viewing another person as necessarily unknowable, and my practice is to know them in the same way I'd want to know the world around me. Does that turn them into an object? And is the difference between that kind of othering and your posing of the you is that the other person stops being a thing I want knowledge about, but rather a condition from which I can get knowledge, like thinking with them, we proceed to knowledge rather than them being the object of knowledge. Am I understanding your talk properly? That's my question.
Yeah, I think two thoughts occurred to me. One is, you might even say, try to point that the famous epistemological problem, the problem of other minds, if you try to state it in second person terms, it really becomes sort of laughable. It would be something like, can I believe that Joshua, who's just addressed a question to me, right, challenging me on this or that, what evidence have I got that he is a thinking person? Well, this is why I talk about sheer interactivity. It's when I reflect on the sheer interactivity of being challenged by somebody, which even in this remote kind of Zoom environment is, so if we were face to face across the table or something, it would be more, it would feel more gripping, as it were. It's hard for me to give that question any real bite. Right? The problem with other minds classically, as you know, and I don't want to go on about this, is rehearsing, ABC stuff, is that what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing the outside of just of your face at the moment, and that's the data I've got, and now I've got to make inferences to what's going on behind it. That's the way the problem's set up. But if you don't allow the problem to be set up that way, say, what do you mean? Is it this chap I'm talking to that I'm supposed to have doubts about? Then it seems to me the epistemic problem just cannot be put with the same impact. That at least, you could even say something stronger. It is unintelligible, to put it that way. A deeper point, I think, is that these thoughts may stimulate us to think, what do we really think about knowing other people? Right? What is it to know somebody else? Forget about the skeptical problem about whether I ever do know anybody else. What would it be to know somebody? Uh, what am I saying when if I am working the old tradition? What is it I'm supposed to be skeptical about? Um, uh, I mean, I think the way the tradition is usually put is that puts the problem is that there are certain data going on inside you that you have access to, and that I haven't got access to, right? And I would like you to be an open book. I mean, almost literally, I would like to be able to open you up and see your thoughts. That's why people keep on fantasizing about machines that will allow us to read people's brains, that kind of idea. And then if I knew that, I would really know them. I think the exact opposite would be true, by the way. I mean, if I had a way of knowing something about somebody that reduced them to the same ontological status as an open book, I wouldn't know them at all.
Yeah, it seems to be the issue here is turning, it's that structure of like data as to describe other people, turns them into things to be, like you said, opened.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's wildly interesting. I'll turn to some questions. Would you like me to read out all the questions at once, or do you want one question at a time?
I'm of an age where I
Of
would
course.
remember my own name. Go on.
No worries.
One at a time.
Okay, so first question is someone saying, a wonderful perspective, Michael. I once attended a psychology talk that used the phrase bidirectional feedback to describe the interaction between the person and their environment. It struck me like a thunderbolt, and now I use this. Or even multidirectional feedback when trying to talk about the lack of isolated individuals in the world. My question for you then is there any special vocabulary that you use to try to remind yourself or others about this perspective of yours?
I mean, I think the simple answer is probably no, but I'm not boasting about that. I mean, I think that all the words that I'm inclined to use when I think about these things, I've used in this paper. And there was like interactivity and I tried to keep and more concrete words, like the impact that people have on us and so on. But however, I don't want to be sniffy about disciplines that have gone into this more seriously, more systematically than I have. For example, the talk that was yesterday about social ontology, that it struck me, I must say, I mean, I'm unfamiliar really with that. And it seemed to me on the whole that he was more concerned with institutions and the social ontology of the ontology of social institutions than I am. And that makes everything sound a bit different. But nonetheless, they had their systematic way of studying what goes on objectively in social institutions, even in systems like markets and exchange of money and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that we could get something out of that. And another area, just which we just listened to an excellent paper from Pete. That's another area where you get a systematic vocabulary that which will talk in terms of systems and interactions. And though maybe at the end of the day, as Pete and I have often said to each other, we're irreducibly opposed to each other. Nonetheless, I could learn and benefit from some of the language that comes from that discipline. They're just two areas I would have thought of. And maybe the social sciences in general. It's I don't know, is this too rash a statement? Philosophy since I don't know when, since the Enlightenment has been closely allied to psychology. And of course, it's tried to, transcendentalize it to distinguish themselves from empirical psychologists. But its whole language, the language about mind, is highly psychological. But it seems to me that we could benefit from looking to sociology rather than to psychology. to develop a new language, which would at least perhaps avoid some of the old traps. Okay.
Okay. Well, since you brought up Pete, that's quite relevant, since Pete has a question himself.
Sure.
I'll read it out verbatim.
Yeah.
If second-person conversational interactions depend upon implicit, non-conversational forms of interaction, why couldn't first-person thoughts be seen as constituted by subpersonal interactions of a similar sort? Pre-conversational communication between distinct neural processes that occasionally rise to the level of an internal argument. For example, when one plays a devil's advocate against oneself.
Well, in a way, that question sums up the whole problem, of a distinction between two views, and it's a very important issue. This, and we're not going to get any distance with it right now, but I quite accept that it's perhaps one of the most serious challenges that somebody wants to push the wet line that I want to push has got to face. I'm prepared to admit, not admit, I mean, accept and recognize it's necessary that in order to have what human communication, and not just human communication, but I'm very keen on animal communication, by the way, and the meaningfulness of animal lives. In order to have that, there has to be in the natural world all sorts of systems that are going that may perhaps very well be best analyzed in terms of the exchange of information and so on, subpersonal systems that are best understood in terms of information exchange. I think that's perfectly, it seems to me it's already happening. What worries me a little bit is if we kind of, I know, go all panpsychist about it. I mean, the fact that there has to be, in some sense, an exchange of information in this precious sense that now it's used, doesn't mean that really what we've got are little communicating homunculi within the human knower. Right? So, I mean, I am committed to the view that meaning, in the sense that I'm using it, and I think the sense that has been used in philosophy since Plato, is a phenomenon of the biosphere. And it emerges in social animals when they get a sufficiently complex social life. That's, broadly speaking, the picture. All right. Now, there are a number of cautionary remarks that have got to be put in there. That doesn't mean to say that I'm arguing for some a priori reason for banning other kinds of intelligence. Goodness knows what the natural world contains by ways of minds that are really quite different from anything we have cognizance of. Right? But I don't feel that we're helping ourselves by trying to explain the substratum of human capacities to understand and communicate by simply repeating the process at a lower level. Okay. That's a sort of line that I would take, but it's a source of great contention.
Well, Pete seems to reply with a solidarity against panpsychism, so hopefully that is
well, that's at least
a positive thing.
Yeah, true.
Yep. I guess one question I have, I was thinking about the question earlier on about language as perhaps a problematic schema that kind of favors the first person. I was wondering, do you think that we have to do an active effort to bring language into this kind of second person epistemology that you've described, or do you think language is inherently conversational and as such already there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that language is essentially, in the first place, conversational. That's the answer to your second question, I think. However, I said a few minutes ago that I'm very keen on animal communication. And it seems to me that this kind of the emergence of meaning takes place lower down the phylogenetic scale than human beings. It doesn't just emerge, as some analytic philosophers have been prepared to argue, it doesn't just emerge with language. Okay? It seems to me that it emerges when you get social interactions that are complex enough to allow for a change in the normative space between animals. Now that's, I'm sorry to use that jargon and this horrible jargon. What I mean is that they intrude on each other's lives and elicit responses. So the one gibbon insists on being groomed, and the other gibbon has got a problem now. Either it's going to groom it or it's not. And if it doesn't, that's a problem. That's going to lead to consequences, and which have a meaning. And they have a meaning in the lives of those animals. Now they do all of that without anything that we will formally call language, right? And this is why I think the pragmatics is so important in the study of mind, because I mean, I want to put forward a radical theory of pragmatics. That is, I don't think that a radical theory of linguistic pragmatics. That is, I don't think that language can be best understood by semantics and logic and stuff like that. And then you need pragmatics for one or two special purposes to explain indexicals or something like that. Right? I think that pragmatics goes right the way down in language. And what you, to be crude about it, what you get in vervet monkeys and stuff is the pragmatics without the verbiage. Right? Now that's very important, of course, and it means there are all sorts of things they can't do. Right? But that they have meaningful lives that require, if we're going to describe them, we will have to describe them in terms of their thoughts and intentions and desires and so on. That flows from the fact that they have these interactive exchanges within a normative space. That's the argument. Okay, and that's what you need. You need an animal, right? So does that make anything?
Yeah, I mean, we got another question. Is kind of the person who asked the question says that they feel that you've already answered it, but I don't know, maybe reading it out would evoke new angles to approach this problem. Curious, given recent philosophical debate on this issue, where non-animal life might fit into Michael's view. And they add, it's okay if it does not. Just curious as to how far the second entity perspective goes and what are the limits on it.
Well, I think I've tried to describe at least some aspects of that. It really does matter to me, I think. One thing that worries me is that if we find it difficult to attribute meaningful states to animals, that we're going to end up with a kind of magical theory of human thought. It's going to be parachuted in to the biosphere, you know, at this point where we suddenly developed a language, right? And that seems to me to be, well, it's opposed to the whole program of trying to have a naturalized account, in some way or other, a naturalized account of language. But I mean, yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of interesting things about this. I mean, in animal studies, in mythology, for example, an awful lot of damage, I think, has been done, or a lot of people have been distracted by research into animals, painstaking research into animals, in an attempt to find out whether their signals, for example, their warning signs, their warning calls, have whether they have a specific meaning. So can these particular noises they make be regarded as words? Right? And then the suggestion is, well, if they are individual words, do they have grammars? So can they be strung together into forming sentences? That kind of inquiry. And that seems to me to be a completely, well, the wrong road to go down. I don't know, some people may have seen, it's now quite old, there was a very good documentary made about the attempt to teach a chimpanzee called Nim to speak. It's there on the YouTube, anybody can get it. And that was a real tragic case, I think, of animal research. To cut a long story short, a newborn chimp was taken away from its mother and brought up in a human family. And things went reasonably all right for a bit. By the way, this was under the aegis, as I remember, of Chicago University, a Professor Terrence, I think. Terrace, I can't remember, not quite sure. Now, the reason why it's worth mentioning in this discussion is that eventually the whole thing collapsed. I mean, what brought on the crisis was that the chimp, surprise, surprise, got bigger. And when it got bigger, it became dangerous, difficult to keep in a domestic environment. Now, they ended up putting it back into some sort of animal, well, eventually sanctuary, though at first it was sent to laboratories for various nasty reasons. The issue of philosophic interest was that the family that the chimpanzee was fostered by were utterly convinced that they were communicating in a rich and permanent, or perpetually, constantly, with this animal. But the academic researchers became convinced that the chimpanzee was not really learning anything to do with language, even though it used science to communicate. And eventually, for that reason, that the animal seemed to be using noises, and sorry, not noises, but gestures, it's deaf language, to acquire food and things like that. So the researchers concluded that it wasn't really using the words meaningfully, it was just using them, as it were, manipulatively to satisfy its needs and so on. And that just seemed to me to be, splitting the problem in exactly the wrong place. And it was a moral tragedy, because I think people behaved, and academics behaved very badly as a result of this. So I think we have to have a more pragmatic and more holistic account of meaning than counting the number of signs that the chimp has got. It's got 250 words, they'd say. It's learning a new word every day. Okay. Well, we don't do that with human babies. And for good reason we don't do it, because we're communicating with them. Can I make one more point about this? That I like saying this, that with infants, things always start before the beginning, right? So we talk to newborn babies long before they can talk. And if we didn't, they would never start talking. We blame infants, gently blame, hold infants' responsibility long before we really think they're responsible for spilling their milk or drawing on the wall or something, right? In other words, we set out the table before we expect them to sit up at it. If we don't set out the table, they'll never sit up at it. So this normative space that I talk about is a real thing. You know, it's not some sort of academic concoction. It's the real thing where you create an environment and you invite the child in to take part in an activity which it has no prudential reason for joining.
Yeah, that's a really great kind of down to earth image of what that type of space looks like. That was really useful for me, at least. Here's another question. Hello and thank you. Does the second person interaction need to be between two animals, or does it emerge between an animal and an impinging non-living entity?
Well, I suppose it could. It's a good question. It could. I'm inclined to think that's got to be parasitic. You know, that if for example, oh, well, you hear stories that you know, such and such a person married a tree. Okay, can people marry trees? Well, I don't know. And I don't care very much. I mean, but it's if they can marry a tree, it's because they can marry another human being, kind of thing. We're modeling it on that, so that if somebody takes up a conversational attitude or an interactive attitude with some inert object, a wicked thought occurs to me that human beings have developed intense personal relationships with God. And of course, God has been, well, I say of course, but I suppose it's true that usually in cases like that, God is being conceived of as a person, but he certainly doesn't impinge on that person in the normal naturalistic way that I was talking about, right? But they'd have to make up some sort of story about that, I think, for me, well, not just for me, I mean, for us to count it as a piece of communication.
Well, it's interesting. Well, I wonder if even in the example of God or inanimate objects, there is some sort of imagined impinging happening. So with God, you imagine when someone prays, there is. I think a religious person would describe, well, there's a feeling that comes over me, or I see the effects of God in my life. There's yeah. I think there's even a model of impingement that makes it possible, that sort of interaction.
Yeah. Well, you know, that suits me fine. Could I make one mischievous point?
Go for it.
That it's not quite on this point, goes back really to the previous remarks we were making. That, you know, Wittgenstein says, perhaps what is one of his most famous remarks is, if a lion could speak, we wouldn't understand it. That's often taken in a rather boring way to mean that lions are a great mystery to us, so that if he was to speak, well, we don't share a common life, and so goodness knows what he would say, kind of thing. Now, somebody might object to that and say, well, actually, we've been studying lions very closely, and we know exactly what they're interested in, and so on and so forth. So if a lion could speak, he would talk about lionesses and antelope and his arthritic hip. You see, that's what would interest him. Now, if you say that, you're rather assuming that, as were, if he was given language, these concerns would force their way into his language. In other words, the world, which in this case it would be partly his own body, but also his immediate environment, would demand that it be talked about. Okay, it seems to me to be a kind of form of Platonism. You know, that irrespective of what the lion thinks about it, his interest would just burst through into his language. Now, my mischievous thought is this: the lion is an extremely competent animal, and he's already got lionesses and antelope, and he's not so good with his arthritic hip, but he's got those things under control. Right? His lifestyle has developed, so he's very efficient at doing all that. So if God was to give him the gift of language, I don't see any reason why he should think that his language, his new gift, should be used as a vehicle for expressing or whatever these interests. And so my mischievous thought is this, that what would very probably happen is that one of the difficulties of lion's life is that in the drought, the wildebeest disappear, you see. So there he is looking across the savannah and there's no wildebeest. And now his skills let him down. So now what's he do? He invents a religion. So his first use of language would be to pray to the lion god to bring back the wildebeest, you see. That it's not entirely meant to be just a silly joke, this, right? Okay. You can't read off the world how it has to be talked about. And that has implications, I think, for our theory of language. So goodness knows, I mean, this is what I'm not sure this is what Wittgenstein meant, but goodness knows what the lion would talk about, but not because we don't know anything about his states or his needs or whatever.
Okay. So we've got some more questions.
Oh.
First one. It sounds like you're taking an evolutionary perspective with one of Darwin's strange inversions, quote unquote, hoping to build language from the bottom up rather than study it only from the high perspective of current human design. Do you have any good books to recommend for this perspective on the evolutionary development of language? Ava Majors, I'm not sure if I pronounced it properly, has recently published When Animals Speak, which I think you would like. Yeah. Do you have others?
Yes, I know. I've come across her stuff, and she's written another book as well, which I've got. I haven't actually finished it. There's a whole pile of literature. I mean, it's not going to come to my mind right now. Louise, somebody, what's she called again? I can't remember. Anyway, there's a whole pile of research going on into the signaling of, I think, vervet monkeys comes to mind because they've been studied in depth. Could I make one point? I really haven't got a good answer to that for where you should go for books, other than to go to the sections on mythology, where there's a vast literature. Ian Ground and I wrote a book called Can We Understand Animal Minds? Very direct book. It's a good book, but it's not in print at the moment. But I'm sure you could get a copy under the self-printing scheme. What was that? I was going to say something's gone out of my mind. Oh yes, an evolutionary explanation. One thing that I'm keen on, despite everything I've said about wanting a naturalized theory of meaning, is that there can't be a straightforward natural history of meaning. And that seems to me, and it seems to me that that's close to the core of the problem that philosophers have felt about the emergence of meaning. It would be a good question for us to stop and think. Why do philosophers find this difficult? Right? I mean, if we allow ourselves to imagine the universe speaking, or God speaking to us, and we as philosophers arrive there and say, look, I spent my life thinking about the problem of the emergence of minds. And I can imagine God saying, well, why did he bother? I mean, from my point of view, it wasn't difficult at all. I mean, I thought, why didn't you spend a lot of time thinking about black holes or supernovae. It took me a lot of effort to make those things, whereas mines, they're, you know, as cheap as chips. They're all over the place. And, you know, there's no problem about them. Why did you find it a problem? And that's a good question. Is it just because it's our problem, or that we're the problem? Is that why we find it a problem? Well, I think I want to say no, not quite that, but close to that. And it hangs on this distinction I talked about in my paper about being inside the game and outside the game. That there can be an evolutionary account of how human beings, the species human beings, comes to be in the stage where it develops language. But the move from the explanation, as it were, from the outside, which any scientific account is going to be, third person account is going to be, is one thing, fine. And that explanation, if you just stick to it, may generate no really mind-boggling problem. The problem comes when you contrast the inside of the game with the outside. Okay. So again, the chess problem. What you know, that I can understand all sorts of things about the history of chess and the development of chess and how chess works from an objective point of view and the systems analysis of it, everything. But what's it like to play chess, right? What's it like to be in the grip of the rules? Okay. Well, that is not, all I want to say here now is that that's not another argument. It's not it's a shift. It's a change in stance. It's a moving from the outside of some practice, which you can describe and explain and have various theories about, to actually doing it, being inside, and not just to be doing it, but to have your own way of life and your own mind structured by those rules. And that's, again, it seems to me, it's something that pragmatics could talk about, but not semantics or logic. It's a shift in attitude, not an inference. And I think that's why philosophers have found the mind difficult, because they keep on saying it. You know, even they say things like, well, the neurologist tells me all about what's going on in my brain, but nothing in neurology tells me about the taste of tomato soup. Well, what it means that you can do science, so cows come home, but you will never eat a bowl of tomato soup by doing science. It's a different kind of activity. Now, it sounds ridiculous to give an example like that, but I'm serious. I mean, I think that a lot of philosophy which contrasts the subjective experience of what's it like to be, right, with the neurology or whatever, is basically a mistake of that sort. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. That's always, I mean, we started today with a talk about phenomenology, right, which is whole practice concerned with the limits of that type of approach to thought and description. So yeah, that really does track for me.
I was very interested in the talk earlier this afternoon about phenomenology, and I shouldn't talk about it because I'm not an expert on it, but I certainly don't think that it's endemic to phenomenology that it makes the mistake I've just been talking about. No, not at all. But I think phenomenology is looking at the structures of experience. Right? Now that's a different kettle of fish. Right? And it is possible to take an objective view of our own experience. Right? Okay. That's, and in various ways. In a way like the talk this afternoon was about colors, color saturation and stuff like that, and the subjective experience of the contrasts and how we go wrong and all that. I mean, all of that is empirically investigatable. Okay.
Well, to move back into the questions, we've got another one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael, for that really the informative talk you've given. They found it thought-provoking. And they asked, is one of the ways that you, quote unquote, you, helps is by making a difference in the meaning / adding a layer of meaning, saying, I love him to someone whilst referring to the person you love is different from saying, I love you to the person you love.
I'm sure the answer's got to be yes, and kind of deeply yes, so that if the idea that that meaning is created within these exchanges makes any sense, then there has to be. It's a bit like the jazz analogy, there has to be something something genuinely interactive has to be necessary to what's going on. And then something new has to emerge out of this. Okay. I mean, when I say it has to, what I mean is that it's not improvisation, that's not what's happening. That's what we mean. Right? So if I'm having a conversation with somebody, of course it might be a quite trivial conversation in which I'm just passing the word along, as Heidegger says. I'm just passing words around. Are you going to come for a drink? Yeah, end of story. But in a conversation, and I don't mean it has to be an intense, deep thing, but it might be, like the example that the questioner gave, that the significance of it is a genuinely new creation. Right? I mean, there's almost, there's the comedy kind of situation that occurs in so many films. I mean, do you love me? Yes. Do you really? Do you really? Do you really? What do you, you don't even know the meaning of the word, blah. We could write a script about this, right? The problem is not the meaning of the word love. We all know that we're all competent English speakers. We all know what the word means, right? Okay. It's what is the word doing in that conversation? And what are you doing uttering it in that conversation? Right? That's the thing that might be causing tremors. It goes back to the point of, what do we really mean when we talk about knowing somebody else? Okay. So the other, stick with this trite example, somebody says, I love you, and you look at them and you try, they've said it, and then you wonder, are they telling the truth? Are they genuine? Do they really mean it? Do they really know what they're saying? And 101 other questions, right? It seems to me it's much, I'm just trying to think, it's a pragmatic question, see. I mean, I don't mean it's a practical question, I mean it's a question of pragmatics, that the exchange about love is more like dancing with somebody.
That kind of comes back to something I was really curious about asking about, because it seems like the experience of saying I love you to someone is really heavily dependent on some sort of individual, as in I and you, autonomy. Like, I have reached a point where I love you, and like we are both autonomous beings in this kind of interaction. That's kind of what makes it significant. And during your talk, when you talk about sheer interactivity and communication, I started thinking about like ants, and there's this amazing phenomenon, probably horrifying if you encountered it in person, called the ant spiral, where for people in the talk, if you aren't familiar with this, it's basically ants give off pheromones to communicate to like the next in line of what direction to go in. And if something goes terribly wrong, you can end up with hundreds of ants giving off like wrong, a bad loop of pheromones, and they kind of end up in a spiral, and they can't stop. They walk until they die. And I was wondering if this is another example of kind of, is this conversational, this event that occurs, or not. Like I was thinking about the first talk we had today about Merleau-Ponty talks about seeing the world in terms of I can. And I wonder if you're an ant who travels based on pheromones in a pack, do you see the world in terms of I can with? And would that type of interactivity, if you want to call it that, not be conversational? Because like you said in the talk, it would be a collective I, it wouldn't be a genuine you. So as such, does this kind of model you've laid out always require some type of individuality or autonomy rather than a collective? And I guess an add-on to that question is, are there certain species who can't access this sort of sheer interactivity or conversational style?
Yeah, there are a whole pile of issues in what you've said. It's very, it's interesting stuff. One sort of a meta point to start with is that I'm glad I said that I haven't got any a priori reasons for believing that there couldn't be minded creatures that operate in a quite different way from the way that I'm now talking. And even leaving science fiction kind of problems out of the question, we see, I don't know what to say about ants. I've no idea. That's one point. I've got no philosophic reason for laying down the law about what must be true about ants. However, I don't want to just leave it at that and say that we have to do some empirical work. I mean, I think this is such a boring thing to say, but philosophers, I think, have tried too often to solve problems about animal minds and those sorts of things on a priori grounds. And I don't see why you shouldn't say, well, look, can dolphins talk? Well, and then you try to define what a language is, and then you read a couple of articles in the Sunday supplement or something about dolphins, and then you see whether it fits in or not. That won't do, right? If we want to know whether, to ask the question sensibly and give a sensible answer, we have to actually study the life of animals and study it as close as we can to the inside, by the way, which is what ethologists do. So we try and find out the significance of signs and things like that. And they don't just have to be, as it were, animals that are roughly our size. They could be ants, for example, and there have been experiments done where you introduce foreign bodies into the hive, or whatever it's called, the ant hill, in the shape of an ant on a stick, that kind of thing, where you do various things to change the environment to see whether you can observe interesting stuff. So I think, so what do I want to say? I want to say that we must take empirical work seriously. The same is true, by the way, of human infants. And one of the things that is noticeable that child psychology has pushed back infant capacities in quite a remarkable way. The more we study infants carefully, though of course human beings have known about infants from the year dot, but the more we study them carefully, the more we feel forced to attribute mental capacities to them. I mean, like recognizing faces and things earlier than people thought, recognizing music and that sort of stuff. So now, what? Well, I'm just warning. We must look at the empirical work and avoid a priorism in relation to these problems.
Okay. Well, thank you for that thoughtful response. I've received a message from Hannes that
we've done well.
We've done well, and we've reached time. So Hannes, as our leader, should return and
Right.
What's the opposite of commence? Take us out. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Well, could I just say before Hannah says anything, thanks very much to you, Joshua, and to everybody who asked questions and who hung around. I still see there are 30 people there. We should have found something better to do by now on a Sunday evening. But anyway, and of course, thank you, Hannah. So there you are, over to you.